Okay, I feel we're at a good place where people are starting to trickle in. So let's kick this off. So first and foremost, just welcome everyone. Really appreciate you all joining us today. And welcome to Surviving the 2024 Election. My name is Gabbi Timmis. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing for Braver Angels. And today we are going to be in conversation with Dr. Bill Doherty, a marriage and family therapist and co-founder of Braver Angels. We'll be talking about how to navigate relationships with loved ones who support and vote for a candidate you strongly oppose. Of course, in Braver Angels, we talk a lot about, folks who disagree with us politically, but sometimes elections make it particularly difficult. So we're going to be digging into those dynamics. But first, for anyone who has a question throughout this conversation, please refer to the chat. We're going to throw a Google form in the chat, and that's where you can submit all your questions. We're going to have 30 minutes for Q&A, super lengthy. We'll definitely excited to get into the questions. So yeah, please be sure to share those with us. So firstly, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for this conversation. And I just want to think about specifically, if you could help us think through, what is it about elections and voting that makes it particularly challenging when loved ones differ? I'd love to hear just a reflection.
Yeah, great. And I'm happy to be with you all. So voting is a political act as opposed to a political viewpoint. So a lot of what we deal with in our workshops is how do we communicate across different political views and different political values. And voting, though, is an act, right? Voting ends up with some people being elected and some not. And so when a loved one moves from supporting a candidate who I think may be bad for the country, when they vote for him, is different than they like them. Okay, and so it's an act. I've certainly I've known married couples who didn't reveal who they were going to vote for, and then they come back from the polls and they, like, you voted for the such and such. So it's a political act that has consequences in the world in a way that a viewpoint doesn't. So it's taking sides. And so if you have a family member or loved one and you're taking a side and you're influencing the election that I have strong feelings about, it's particularly challenging. So that's why we're focusing today on how do we deal with loved ones who vote differently, not just who think differently. Does that make sense, that distinction, Gabby?
Yes, yeah. I definitely have been there myself where I felt that the difference. So it's helpful for you to clarify that for us.
Yeah, so the core part of this is that when somebody this close to me takes supports another candidate, then it's very different than a stranger or somebody who's different. And I say particularly family members because we identify with them. With family, we say my spouse, my mother, my father, my brother or sister, as opposed to somebody who is a coworker or something. And it's harder to emotionally accept a big difference when it's somebody that we identify with. Just think about the number of times you may be embarrassed by a family member, usually not embarrassed by a friend, doing something, saying something crazy, but a family member, it's like, whoa, because they're part of us. Okay.
Yeah.
And so a key to this whole thing is to remind myself that they are not me and their actions don't reflect on me and they don't have to be me. They don't have to be me. We don't have to think alike. And which means giving up the desire to change or convert them. And that's hard. That's hard. A lot of times, a lot of disputes among family members in lots of areas, but particularly around politics and voting, is that if I only say the smartest thing, if I only, one more time try this argument, that they will finally be enlightened. And
I've been there.
it doesn't work. It
Yeah.
doesn't work. So you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, I've done it. I think I've done it I tried it for 10 years and then I joined after joining Brave Angels, officially retired that because you're totally right. It doesn't
Yeah,
work. It makes
yeah,
it more challenging. Yeah.
yeah. And so it's good to know that it doesn't work. And in fact, family members are often the least likely to be changed by somebody in the family, a loved one coming on strong. This is psychologists talk about reactance that stirs up that a threat to my autonomy, that you're telling me that who I'm supporting is the wrong person. And this brings out psychological reactance in a family member. When a family member does that, that makes it less likely. You know, it's not that we don't influence each other. So I want to add that. And it's not that, you know, we should give up the idea of wherever influence one another. Influence is part of life. But influence around something as important as voting, you know, that tends to occur over time, and it occurs in an atmosphere of respect, not in an atmosphere where people feel they're saying there's something wrong with them, because that's a key part of this for our loved one. If I'm upset with how you're going to vote, implicitly I'm communicating there's something wrong with you. That, or at least that's how it's heard. There's something wrong with me, with you, and then people will rebel against that.
Mm.
So we're going to get into some specific scenarios, but to finish this sort of first part about overall attitudinal approach, if my emotional equilibrium gets disturbed, if I can't manage, if I'm having trouble managing my emotions because of how you're voting, that's my problem.
Mm.
That's my issue. That's not your issue. I mean, that's the heart of this, that maintaining, and then whatever I need to do, remind myself that you're a good person, that I love you, that differences are going to occur. You know, it's not a reflection of me. Whatever I have to do to remind myself that that I am responsible for my emotional equilibrium. So I'm going to say something now as a family therapist. A lot of ongoing negative conflict in families comes from I am not feeling good because you're like this. And so you change in order for me to feel okay about me. Instead of saying, I can't make you do that. So how do I manage my own emotional equilibrium? Now, we'll talk a little bit about if somebody's coming on strong to you, that's a different story. In other words, how somebody's behavior, um, if somebody is verbally attacking you, well, that's different. Okay, it is going to bother you, and you have to have good sort of family self-defense skills. Here, what we're talking about is the fact that this person has told me, or I do know they're going to vote for this other person. If that is creating a disequilibrium in me, what I'm saying is that's my issue
Mm.
to deal with. That's not their issue. And if you're on the other end of it, if somebody, because of your vote, is really worked up, um, that's for them to deal with. That's not for me to fix them.
Mm. That's
That's
really,
not for me to fix them.
that's the phrase "you made me upset" it came to mind of
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
and so it's actually really a powerful reframe, because it's like, no, it's, it's empowering people, it's empowering individuals. Like, we have control over our own reactions and our responses there, and so it's on us to kind of to manage those. So that's really helpful.
yeah. So what we're going to focus on after these sort of general points is two scenarios that I have seen in my work and in my life, and I've heard from lots of therapists, are two scenarios that in which there tends to be conflict, distress among families and loved ones around this election, and those two are blues being very upset with their Trump voting loved ones. And the other scenario is that folks who are going to vote for Trump getting a lot of grief from their blue relatives. Now, I want to say that there are other scenarios. There are Reds who are distressed about Harris and where Harris could lead the country. And so there's disputes and conflict that occurs there. But here for this, and we can talk about that in the Q&A if people would like. But for here, I'd like to focus on two common scenarios that I have observed. And that is something for blues around how to manage their own reactivity when loved ones are going to vote for Trump, and then for folks who are going to vote for Trump, how to manage, um, if you will, their own boundaries when loved ones are coming after them. So those are the two, and I'm excited to talk about this in some ways because we don't in Braver Angels. We haven't really talked a lot about particular elections, particular political leaders. You know, our workshops are more for general purposes, and hopefully we'll go on as we deal with differences. So I'm happy to have a chance to talk about these two scenarios. Knowing, by the way, this is not a kind of party line for Braver Angels. This is Bill Doherty. These are my reflections for what they may be worth for people.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
the first is input for blues when they can't abide a loved one supporting and voting for Trump. That's the first one. Okay, and I'm going to divide that between when their blues loved one is a Trump enthusiast. And then the second category will be when somebody is ambivalent about Trump, but is going to vote for Trump anyway, because I think those stir up different kinds of things. So we got that, Abby. Am I being clear about those categories?
Yes, yes, and this is super helpful. So I'm excited to I appreciate you distinguishing the two because I think those are two very different scenarios that will help us in both cases. So yeah, I would
Yeah,
love to hear. So for the first one, if your loved one is a Trump enthusiast, how do we navigate those if
yeah,
you're at blue?
yeah. So once again, my own take on it. The first would be, so this is speaking to blues now, um, accept that you and this person are living in separate political realities right now. Okay, it's kind of like you have two very different religions, and you're both maybe interested in, passionate about both of them. So just accept you have different realities now. There's a very prominent political leader that you are black and white on your feelings about.
Hmm.
What this can help you do is to minimize fruitless arguments. Again, if you would just want to use the religious analogy, if you're Christian and a Hindu or something, and you're both devout on this, why would you try to get somebody to change their mind about their core religious beliefs? So what I'm suggesting is for blues who have loved ones who are enthusiastic supporters of Trump, give up arguing, give up arguing, but be willing to note that you're seeing this candidate, this guy, very differently. Okay, so it's not that I just have to be silent, but I can say, so I think you and I have very different takes and kind of opposite takes. Okay, and you could let it go with that. You could
Mm.
let it go with that. So you have not just sort of listened with no statement of where you are, but you would not, if somebody is enthusiastically going on, you wouldn't be looking for the weaknesses in the argument. You wouldn't be, saying yes, but back, because it's likely to be fruitless. And you may be coming across, in an antagonistic way, in a way that's not going to work. But what you could say, if you wanted to engage, is to calmly say that you have very different feelings and concerns about Trump. And let's say you are worried. I'm worried. I'll role play this. I'm worried that he's going to be quite destructive for the country. And then to say, and I know you see it differently. Okay. So I'm not trying to persuade you, but I'm defining where I am, but I'm doing it calmly as opposed to, and with I statements, say, okay, where I am and what I'm worried about is that he's going to be very harmful to the country. Then fill in the blanks for what specifically you don't like, as opposed to my loved one has just said he's going to make the country great again, and then I say no, he's going to destroy the country.
Mm.
Okay, then I'm in it, and it is likely to be fruitless and maybe damaging. It's going to get my blood pressure up and the other's blood pressure is up. And it's not going to, the world will not be better for this conversation. The person, my loved one will not be, I will not be, the world will not be better. And so it's the ability to say where you are with I statements, concerns. You can say it, with strength, but without making pronouncements about Trump, without telling this person, that they're duped or that they're in a cult or something like that.
Yeah, that's such an important distinguishment. The he's going to ruin this country versus what I'm scared about, what I'm personally worried about is that this could be destructive in this way.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a helpful shift.
And then name exactly what you're concerned about, as opposed to when I hear some blues who are very worried about Trump say things like, our country won't make it, our democracy will be in ruins. I'm not saying it's wrong to believe that, but be specific. What are you concerned about? If you're concerned about the democracy, judiciary system, the military, be specific if you want to go there. But don't expect the other person to agree, and don't come across in an attacking mode. So the last thing I'm going to say on this is that part of what really grates Trump supporters, this is my observation, is when blues come across with moral superiority. Your guy is a depraved human being and an enemy of democracy. Okay, I, on the other hand, am a, and by the way, and you must like, and you like somebody like that. So I have better standards, right? Implicitly, I'm saying I have better standards than you do. So the counter, so here's, I like to do thought experiments, guys. So if I think that somebody close to me has kind of lost their senses in some way about Trump, that they're far too forgiving, and otherwise they may have good judgment, but here they really don't. They've gotten caught up in what I think is a non-rational enthusiasm. Okay, so that's a premise. To ask myself, have I ever gotten caught up in non-rational enthusiasms for somebody in my life or for some cause? Am I immune to that?
It's
Okay.
humbling. Yeah.
Yeah. These are the sort of thought experiments that I try to do in order not to see myself, and this is a problem with a loved one in particular, see myself as morally superior, so much smarter, would never get into non-rational beliefs. No, ask myself, has this ever happened, or could I imagine it happened?
Yeah.
And again, for the people listening in, I'm not saying that I'm not making a statement that I think enthusiastic Trump folks are irrational, whatever. I'm saying if you're a blue and that's how you view it, okay, ask yourself, are you immune to this? Because what really, really hurts relationships, one of the things it does, isn't just the fruitless conflicts. It's if somebody thinks you are so much better as a person. Okay, that you are more enlightened, morally superior. Whoa, that really, really does undermine relationships.
So, Bill, can I ask you if someone, and we started off with Trump enthusiastic voters, but for someone who is still voting for Trump, but maybe is a little bit more ambivalent on it. I know you said
Right.
that can be sometimes uniquely challenging in other ways. I'd love to hear a bit about
That's
that.
a nice transition. That's the next category.
Yeah.
Thank you. So again, this part of it of our interview is for blues who are upset with a loved one voting for Trump. And we just talked about you have a Trump enthusiast in your family. And now this category, as you said, is for what I call ambivalent Trump voters. And lots of variation here. There's lots of reasons people support any candidate, but in this one, we're talking about a loved one who may agree with you about some of your concerns about Trump, maybe, character concerns or, you know, whatever, some policy concerns, whatever. So it's not that they think he's the perfect candidate in any way, or going to save the country, but they often they see him as the lesser of two evils, and really have concerns about the alternative. Elections are binary, okay,
Mm.
and what's the alternative? And so a key thing there, if you are a blue and dealing with a loved one, one of the uh, this can actually be harder for some blues because they think the person, since since you agree with me that he's not the greatest human being, why are you doing this? So you can seem more hypocritical, right? If their loved one is a Trump enthusiast, it's not hypocrisy. It's they're going for the guy who they think is the best person for the country, far and away. But if somebody's ambivalent, and I've seen this in married couples, like, how come you agree with me part way, and then you're still going to vote for the guy? Okay, and so what I've learned there is the importance of trying to understand the worries and fears that your loved one has about the blue side.
Mm.
And this can be a bit of a blind spot, I think, around politics, is thinking that the strong worries and concerns of the other side are kind of manufactured. They're not really real. But in fact, many Reds who are going to vote, or maybe independents who are going to vote for Trump, are really worried about um, Harris, with her, they see her as a big government liberal, and then if you were to have, um, Democratic liberal federal rule for not just 4 years but 8 years and just keep going,
Mm.
that there is a real worry that federal power will keep increasing. You have an overmanaged economy. You will have compromises of freedom of thought and expression and religion, because of worries about this sort of woke liberals
Mm.
who would eventually say you can't express the thoughts you have, or you can't hold this job if you have these, say, social conservative beliefs. Also, a concern about weakness. Um, Projecting weakness internationally,
Mm.
um, and in general, a worry about the hegemony, the power, increasing power internally, weakness externally. If the other side of Democrats, of Harris, were to win, and particularly were they stay in power, and a lot of times Reds or Blues don't get that. A lot of times Blues think, well, ours is we're good people, and Trump's a bad guy. And so if you recognize that there's some bad features of him, then why would you vote for him? Well, because you may be more worried about my side than you are about Donald Trump.
Mm.
And so I really recommend that Blues take seriously the fears and worries of ambivalent Trump voters about, the lesser two evils. Is because they see evil on that side. Now, this can be hard because if you're blue, you see your side as maybe making some mistakes, but not a force of evil. So if you're going to engage then with a loved one who is going to vote for Trump but has ambivalence, you can again non-judgmentally express your worry that he is actually the worst of the two evils. That having heard their concerns, you still believe, and then say why you think he would be very negative for the country. And frame it again with I statements. This is what I'm concerned about, rather than truth statements. So not the, oh, he's a would-be dictator kind of just sort of big lines that are said as accusations without an I statement, and they're not tied to specific things, and then acknowledge that you understand that your loved one has some nuanced views of of Trump, that we agree on some things, perhaps related to his character or his impulsiveness, whatever you agree on. Acknowledge we share that, uh, and um, and we worry differently. This is how I might say we worry. We have different worries about the outcome of the election, and we also share some common concerns about Trump. And again, not coming across as you're the compromiser and I'm true. I'm the true, I'm true to my beliefs and you're the compromiser. Because life is, in fact, a whole bunch of compromises, if you will.
Mm.
And every candidate has weaknesses. So this would be the thought experiment I would go through to end this section. The thought experiment is, have I ever voted for somebody who, because I thought they were the lesser of two evils? Have I ever voted for somebody I had concerns? And the answers are yes. In my case, I have voted for people who I had some really strong concerns about. But I thought on balance, I'd rather have, my side. So if you're blue, do some thought experiments like that.
Mm.
Okay, last part then. We're ready to transition, or did you want to add or ask anything about that?
No, I
Section.
thought that was super helpful. I think the distinguishing the ambivalent Trump voters, I think that's super helpful. And I can see for blues, I can imagine how sometimes you get that blind spot of not appreciating the concerns that, a red voter might have on your side. So I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's what I've learned is that um, people on both sides tend to poo-poo grave worries. So
Yeah.
some Trump supporters poo-poo grave worries that blues have. It's alarmism, it's exaggeration. And then the blues do the same thing, that, oh, my side isn't going to just grow government for its own sake. We're trying to help people. And so what we do, and so I urge people to listen for ways in which people on the other side express their worries and fears about my side. Do I tend to dismiss it as not quite real?
Mm.
They've been watching their MSNBC or their Fox News too often, and they don't really believe that. In other words, it's a talking point, Gabby. It's a talking point. It's
Well, I
not.
think some of us are feeling called out right now.
It's really hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard. And if I hadn't been working in Brave Angels all this time, I wouldn't talk in this.
Yeah.
And I had an interesting conversation with a group of therapists recently who wanted a conversation about political divides and how they're showing up in their practice. And it was so interesting because when this was a group of blue therapists, and when I was articulating some of the concerns of Reds, they argued. They argued it. And it's sort of like, well, it's not a rational fear. And then I
Mm.
said to my fellow therapist, so um, when do fears ever go away because somebody else says they're not rational?
Wow.
I mean, come on,
That's great.
right? It's that's not human beings function, and therapists know that, or we should know that.
Yeah.
Okay, last thing then. I'm looking forward to a nice long time for Q&A. So this is input for Reds who are dealing with blues who are upset with them about supporting Trump and voting for Trump. Again, I want to add that there's other combinations of this. There are Reds upset with relatives who are going to vote for Harris, and Reds have concerns about Harris, all kinds of combinations. But for this interview, these are the two that I decided to focus on because these are the ones I run into the most. So, and one of the ways it can happen is like parents are going to vote one way, or and their kids, all kinds of family combinations. But so the scenario again is how Reds can manage support for Trump with outraged
Mm.
blue loved ones. Outraged. Okay. Um, and my first point is that my input is to try to accept that, for better or worse, Trump stirs up high levels of reactivity among people who do not support it. High levels of emotional reactivity. And uh, you might think it's exaggerated, whatever. That's the reality. Okay, and that sometimes what people do when they really hate a politician, get very reactive about a politician, they can't get to that person directly. But here's somebody right in my household, or here's somebody in my family. And so what can happen is that if people can displace their distress about Trump on you, okay?
Yeah.
Because you're the representative of him, you're the mini Trump. And what I'm saying is that's their issue, not yours. Just as I said at the beginning, you can't make them not see you that way, but that is their issue. That is their issue. Um, so the idea is to keep your cool when your loved ones are losing theirs about how you're going to vote. Um, you can't control them; they can't control you. It's not worth trying either way. But uh, don't try not to get defensive about a distress that is not appropriately aimed at you. Now, if you're being obnoxious to them, like anybody, any family member, you're obnoxious to somebody, well, they have a right to be upset with you. But I'm talking about the scenario in which you're doing your best to discern how you want to vote in a complex world, and you've decided you're going to vote for Trump. Um, and you're not trying to tell your relatives that they're wrong. You're not trying, you're not buying MAGA hats for them to tell them that you're not invading their boundaries, but they're pushing on yours. And the main thing is to realize it's their issue. It's not your issue. So don't return fire by telling them they're the fools. If they're saying to you, you're voting for Hitler, uh, don't do the, well, I think Biden is a mini Hitler himself. I mean, or Harris. Don't go there. Just don't get into the mud with people and throw rhetoric around. If you do want to engage, and you're hearing stuff from your relatives, you might want to use the pivot skill that we talk about in our workshops. So let's say you're getting lots of stuff about how terrible Trump is. You could say, would you like to know why I've decided to vote for him? That would be, in our workshops, we call that a pivot. Okay. Now, what we say in our workshops is if they keep on rolling on, then don't say why you're going to support Trump, because they're signaling to you they're not open to it.
Mm-hmm.
But to say, would you like to know why? Could I take a turn here? Would you be interested? And then use your best braver angel skills with I statements. And here's what I would suggest Red do in this situation. Start with anything that you agree with this other person about Trump. I remember in the very first Braver Angels workshop, Gabby, this just came back to the very first one in South Lebanon, Ohio. And it was in the fishbowl. And question was, what are your reservations or concerns about your own side? And one of the Reds, I still remember a young man, he was sitting on my left. He said, well, Trump is a despicable human being.
Wow.
And then he went on to say why he supported him, okay, as for in that role. And it was powerful. It was a powerful moment.
Mm.
It's a powerful moment. And so any way you can agree with something, it's a classic preferential skill.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it has the benefit of connecting before you end up saying you disagree. So I agree with you about these things. Excuse me. And then and here's why. Despite that, I'm going to support him.
Mm.
And then here is another skill, and this is one we don't teach, but maybe we should start putting into our workshops. When you are talking with somebody who fully, completely disagrees with you about what you're going to do, a good skill is to keep acknowledging that. So if I were to say, excuse me, I think he has some character flaws, and there's some things about his last administration I didn't agree with. However, I think he is a better alternative because of XYZ. And then to say, and I know you see that differently.
Mm.
Okay, I know that you have you don't agree with me on this, and then go on to say some more, and sprinkle in acknowledgments that the other person sees this differently. And so let me sort of engage with you on that, Gabby.
Yeah.
What do you think is the advantage of sprinkling in, this is how I see blah, blah, blah. I think he can have some good people around them. And then saying, and I realize you don't see it this way right now. What's the advantage of sprinkling that in?
Okay, hopefully I get the answer right. I'm like back and forth. But to me, like if I'm in a conversation like that and someone acknowledges, my concern or my fear, or just even maybe not even the specific fear, but just the fact
Yeah,
that we differ,
yeah,
um, I would imagine that it would make me less provoked in a way. It would make me feel
yeah.
less inclined to be like to combat what they just said,
Yes,
because
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. Thanks for being like a workshop participant, because that's what I like to do, is to say, what's
yeah,
the advantage of that? And the advantage is that I am accepting you right
mm,
now as somebody who doesn't see it my way.
mm-hmm,
I'm acknowledging that. And then I go on to talk more about, and then if you were to interrupt me, which is likely if you're really reactive, then I could say, yeah, I hear you. You think that such and such will happen. I think it could. I think it's less likely to. And I want to come back to my fear and concern
mm-hmm,
about Harris and about what could happen. And I'm focusing on that. And I realize that's, we're in different places. I'm giving you the respect of acknowledging that we differ. And I'm signaling, I'm not trying to persuade you.
mm-hmm,
I'm not trying to get you to change your mind
mm-hmm,
when I sprinkle in acknowledging our differences, again, neutrally.
mm-hmm.
Neutrally. So neutrally acknowledge disagreements. And part of what happens is the other person doesn't have to keep repeating.
Yeah.
They don't have to keep repeating their point, because I've acknowledged it, and I've acknowledged that we see it differently. So finishing up this part, in other words, for reds dealing with reactivity, and this would be for blues, anybody dealing with incoming, okay? If you're blue and people, it's a lot of incoming about how you're going to vote, but here we're focusing more on reds and supporting Trump. Accept that they're in a different place. Explain, calmly explain with I statements, if you want to engage, why you're doing that. But don't defend or counterattack.
Mm.
So you don't have a claim. We may disagree, Gabby. You don't have a claim on me doing an elaborate defense of why I think Democrats are dangerous for the country. Okay, that their policies are dangerous.
Yeah.
I can state it, I can explain it, but if you start to say, well, give me 3 examples and black, and it's clearly you're not listening.
Yeah.
I don't have to keep defending. It's my view, and I may give an example, and then don't counterattack, which is
Yeah.
really hard.
Yeah.
It's just really hard not to do
Yeah.
it. Don't do the, well, you your side is worse. So explain, accept, explain, don't defend or counterattack. And then the last thing is to use, if the conversation is not going well, if it's deteriorating, use your braver angels exit skills. Okay, we teach these in a number of the workshops to say, from my perspective, we've explored this, what we agree, what we disagree, and I like to suggest we we go back to the football game.
Mm.
Just suggest, and if there's something positive you can say, you appreciated the other person listening to you or whatever, say that. But exit if it's really not going anywhere. If you're finding yourself really, really wanting to counterattack and be very defensive about how you're voting, that's a good time to start exiting.
Yeah. I feel
That's the
like,
soft exit.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's so helpful. I'm just thinking through, there's all these amazing golden nuggets that you've given to us. I think I'm definitely going to be using I appreciate we see this differently. I appreciate you see this differently. I feel like that's going to be a good life raft in any tricky political
In
conversation.
fact, if I could mess with the words there a little bit,
Oh,
I
please.
realize you do.
I realize. Okay,
The
that's
word
helpful.
appreciate could be taken to be a little false because they may
Okay.
not feel appreciated at
Oh,
all.
true. That's great.
Right?
I mean, that's the power of words and how it's
Yeah,
the shift is so different and
yeah,
it's to your point, it's so much more authentic and honest.
yeah.
I realize.
I
Not even
realize, I understand we see this very differently.
I understand. I
I've made
realize.
my,
Okay.
I guess the last thing I'd like to say, and then we'll be moving to
Yeah.
questions, is a little humility doesn't, a little humility can go a long way
Mhm.
because a lot of what we're talking about in who we are going to vote for and who our loved one's going to vote for is our predictions about how things are going to go in the future.
Mm.
A Trump administration, a Biden administration. Nobody has perfect vision for the future. It's very, very murky and cloudy. Uh, and so we do our discernment, we make our decisions, we cast our vote, and so a little humility about the possibility that things will go differently than I expect
Mm.
um, is worth sprinkling in.
Mm.
And so maybe at the end to say in any of these conversations, well, we'll see how it works out. That nobody knows. I mean, and the reason I say this, that world events, things that can happen with the economy, health events. I mean, oh my goodness, right? And
Mm.
so, when you come to decide who I'm going to vote for, I have to be as clear as I can, and then with some humility
Mm.
about the future. That my candidate may be worse than I thought. The other person's candidate might be better than I thought. And I'm not suggesting being wishy-washy,
Mm.
but I'm just suggesting some humility as opposed to passionate clarity
Mm.
with a loved one. I think can go a long way.
Would saying something, I mean, I guess, and it depends on you have to believe it, but saying something like, there's a chance I could be wrong on this. Like, I know that, is that something? Yeah.
Yeah, particularly around something very specific.
Yeah.
You have to mean it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it has to be real, but it has to come from a place of humility.
Mm. Well, can I just say thank you, Bill? This was so helpful and so interesting. It's just elections as we started provoke so many different types of reactions. In Brave Angels, again, we talk more about politics as a whole, but elections, there's particular heat that comes up, and I'm sure there are folks who are taking notes and diligently, really thinking about what we talked about here today. And I want to give people an opportunity to ask their own questions, to ask what's coming up for them. So I think now could be a good time to shift to Q&A. Are you good with that, Bill? We should
Oh
shift to
yeah,
Q&A.
absolutely. Yeah. One of the things, folks, that we decided to do was not do this thing, like, oh, there'll be an interviewer speech and Q&A at the end, and then there's 4 minutes, for one question. It's very frustrating. So we just decided we're going to go to 45 minutes after the hour, and then we'll pick up questions. And so people have been entering those, and then Mary Beth Stibbons is going to call on folks. I think that's how it's going to happen. And then what's going to happen is you're going to, if you have the question, you're going to appear on the screen so that you can ask a question and we can have a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome.
So this is Mary Beth speaking in the background. Our first question is going to be asked by Mary Bussman, and after her it will be Al Smith. And Mary and Al and others, when you ask your question, please remember to turn on your video and mic. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Bill.
Sure.
And the Braver Angels team. So excited to be here. One of the things that I think is really important is being able to hear the other side's perspectives requires the listener to let go of their own emotion. So you named fear or anger or judgment. So in order for me to be able to hear the other side, I need to be able to manage that. Do you have some suggestions about that?
I thought you were just going to say that, and I was going to thank you for that. Then you snuck up on me to say, how do you do it? Okay.
Yeah, right.
Well, boy, yeah, that's a huge one. Some of it is behavioral in the sense that if I try to listen so I'm understanding, like make myself, right? Click that in, that what I want to do now in this conversation, what's my goal, right? Is my goal to have a real conversation, and that means I have to listen now. And I have to listen to the other person more than my feelings. So it's sort of like, okay, here's what I'm doing. And then to note, this is, I'm talking about what I've learned. When you finish what you're saying, and all I feel like doing is countering you, and then there's a little voice in me that says, you actually didn't listen to her. Okay. And then I try to do a corrective. Just say, this is an old therapist trick. Could you tell me more? Could you expand on that? What I'm not saying is I didn't listen to a darn thing you said because I'm so upset. But to do the self-reflection, this sort of okay, this is what's happening in me now. My breathing, is tighter. My jaw muscles are tighter. I just want to argue back. And then instead of doing that, it's very hard to not do something, right? Like, I'm not going to argue. Just ask a question, just ask them to say more, elaborate more. And then what I can do then sometimes, Mary, is then I can settle myself down because I have a little more time. And the things like, could you give me an example of that? Or, how long have you felt that way? Or, something so that the second round, I may listen a little better. But you've really nailed a really heart of this is the sort of self-managing my own emotions. Managing my own emotions. So those are a couple of tips I've learned. Does that sound useful? Okay, thank you. And now we'll go to...
Yes, our next question is from Al Smith. We'll need you to please turn on your video and unmute, and then it will be Catherine Burnett after Al.
Okay, hello, Al.
Hi, Bill. I think actually I submitted this question and I think you touched on it after I submitted it. But how about the approach where you start at a place of common ground? So maybe a red would say, let me just tell you a couple of positions that Harris has that I agree with. If you would also tell me a few positions that Trump has that you agree with, and that kind of a start. Does that work? I think you said it.
Yeah. No, so thank you for that. That first part, I think, is always helpful to say something that you agree with. I was doing a workshop recently and said, every president in my lifetime has done at least one thing I liked. Okay. And some people were looking at me, but there's almost always something good. And that's a good joining move. I would probably not invite the person directly to give me examples of the other side because they may not be ready to. No, I'll do the lead and then hope that they kind of get the hint and try something. But I wouldn't say, how about if you do the same thing, because they may tighten up.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Yeah, it's sort of a lot of this, and it's a really important thing to talk about because a lot of this using these skills is of hoping for reciprocity back. If I show some humility, it increases the likelihood the other will, but it has to be something that comes fully from them without my request for it, because then they might feel managed. Make sense? Okay, thank you.
Our next question is from Catherine Burnett. So if you would please turn your video and audio on now.
Well, thank you very much for all this information and this opportunity. As I was listening, I'm trying to grasp the overall skill of let's not argue, let's listen, find where we agree. You mentioned just right toward the end of you were talking, I'm thinking of the other person saying, give me 3 reasons. And I hear that and I think, okay, we're debating. I don't want to persuade. I want to avoid answering you. And I think often the person I'm talking with, I'm thinking of a particular person, I'm not very effective. I wonder if I was more proactive and didn't get deep in the weeds, we wouldn't get there. But when we get to a moment like that, I'm always trying to dodge. I was wondering a specific advice to try not to, I don't want to give 3 reasons. I want to, because I think we're just going to argue.
Right.
And I want to just, give, but I don't want, but I try to say different things and I get back, you won't give me 3 reasons. And do I just need to go to the exit strategy? I mean, that just means it's definitely too intense, or was there something good I could have tried in that moment that would have been a good response?
Whoa, boy, that's tough. That's like at that point, the person has taken over the conversation. They're your teacher, like they're the teacher, you're the student, give me, mention 3 presidents of the United States in the last 60 years who were Democrat or whatever, right? And so there's a kind of, I'm not saying this person does that, maliciously, but it's a one-up move.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you comply, if you try to comply, you've accepted the one up, one down, and the odds are very high this person will then critique your responses, right?
And they're done that.
Yeah, right. So, and so the challenge is then how to calmly, respectfully decline the request. And so to give the 3 reasons. So this is just off the top of my head. It would depend on the relationship and all that. But I might say, that's a shift in our conversation now about I got to come up with 3 things. And I don't think that's going to be helpful. I'd like to not go there. Okay. I just commented it's a shift. I didn't criticize the other person, because that's not going to do any good. But that's a shift, and I don't know how helpful that's going to be. I'm not, can we go back? Can we, it would be like somebody said, before we go on, you've got to eat these things. Well, I don't want to eat these things, right? So some way, using your own terms and to comment on what just happened with the request and suggest that that's not helpful right now.
Great.
Yeah, and so we call that meta commenting rather than yes or no, I will do it or not. Like, oh, that just took a turn there, and I don't think that's going to be helpful.
Thank you. That's a useful strategy. I appreciate it.
Okay. Good luck. Okay.
There's one anonymous or it's not anonymous. This person says they don't have camera access right now. And they asked, how do I continue to think of a loved one as a good person when their values are so different from mine?
Mm. Okay, thank you for that. Did we have a first name on there? I always like to think about a person. Was there a first name on there?
No.
Okay, that's right. Thank you for that. It's something I hear often. And I don't know, of course, the particular person or persons that this individual has in mind. What I can tell you is that people who share relationships, who share family, who share friendship, people who are loved ones, at the level of highest values, they are often very similar. Very similar. And Gabby, I know you and your dad have, at the convention, you talked about your relationship. Part of what happens when people think about policies and politicians, and there are values embedded in policies, and certainly in choices of politicians to elect. So there certainly are values there. But what we often miss is the highest values that we do share in common. Wanting all of our children to flourish, to have good educations, wanting everyone to have the health care that they need in this country. Wanting most people around immigration want immigration to continue to be part of a country and to have it managed in a way that's good for everybody, including those who are here. Almost everybody wants safe communities and people who are responsible in their neighborhoods and police who are responsible for doing their job. I mean, we go on and on. What I've learned is if you accentuate those values and those aspirations in your thinking about somebody you care about, as opposed to the mid-level values that are embedded in particular policies and particular candidates. That for me is the path forward, to not view myself as occupying a different moral universe than a loved one. The bar for me would be extremely high for me to think I'm occupying that universe. So I could imagine a neo-Nazi relative, or somebody actively a hater. And even there, I wouldn't dismiss them from my life. Even there, I'd look for something we have in common, like we love these children in our family, something I would try to find. But what I've found is that a lot of times people take the values connected with policies. And by the way, those values are connected to predictions about how things are going to turn out. And then assume we occupy different moral universes because we differ there. So to summarize, it's asking myself, does this person care about these larger goals and aspirations? Do we share those? And most of the time, I can find that access point.
Bill, do you mind if since we have a couple minutes, if I reflect on, since we brought it up, because I spoke about at the convention, my dynamic with my dad, where we disagreed, and around the 2020 election, I told him I couldn't even talk to him I couldn't talk to him, period. Actually, not even just about the election, but period. Do you mind if I just reflect on that for a moment?
Please, love it.
Just because as you're talking, and I'm thinking about this question in particular, what I think was one of the challenging things that I was doing, and I was creating my own issues and doing it, was that I was attributing my dad's voting differently to me. I was attributing all of his worst, all the things that I thought were negative about him to that vote. If I had certain, like, I thought there was some shortcomings, and it's all tied up and bound into that vote, and that is just emblematic of all the things that frustrate me about my dad. That's very much so what I did. And one of the things that has helped us, and our relationship has completely changed, specifically on politics, but in many different ways. But one of the things I think helped us, and without totally realizing it, was that my dad is better than anyone I know in my life at showing up. He can thrive at showing up. He shows up anytime you ask him to. And I asked him to show up for me, and he did it without question. And it was like this opportunity for him to be the best version of himself and for me to see him in the best version of himself versus me seeing this vote, seeing this thing that is different between the two of us and tying it to the things that would frustrate me about this person. So it's just kind of interesting. It's like, again, I didn't know I was doing that, but there's something to be said. I wonder about giving that person, if you think you're struggling to think that person's a good person, giving them an opportunity to show up as the best version of themselves. I wonder if that could be helpful.
That's beautiful. It's very powerful. It's very, very touching. Yeah, it's the kind of where family dynamics play into all of this, you know, because we have histories with loved ones. And then when we see politics differently and a politician differently, it can represent you know, the things we don't like about them, or the other differences, the other grievances we have, and then it gets so convoluted to figure out how to manage that. And one of your solutions to that, I love it. It isn't just trying to untangle everything that's ever happened, right? But to ask yourself what are his best qualities. Because nobody is only their politics, and nobody is only their worst self. We all have multiple selves. As you were talking, I was thinking about a relative who is a classic gladiator on politics and everything else. And the guy has, you know, always come across like the biggest know-it-all in the room. I mean, there's my judgment, okay? And I can either choose to emphasize that to the diminishment of positive qualities, or I can say this is one of the most helpful people. If you needed something in terms of fixing your house, or he's very mechanical, and he would just do it in an instant. He'd just drop everything. And then I can think about the one time he was open and vulnerable with me, you know, some years ago, about a personal problem he was having. So I can choose where to emphasize. And that's another way to think about this really good question about values differences. Where do I choose to put my emphasis around somebody's values about public policy, on the big picture or on the small thing? So thank you. Yeah.
So we're getting more questions coming in.
Okay.
So we have one coming up from Megan DeDavy, and after that will be Hannah.
Okay, my question had to do with what Gabby was describing, about nurturing things in your relationship that can be nurtured, and then letting that kind of heal the rift between you, so that when you're having a conversation, you're more likely to listen to each other and see the best in each other. And it's a reciprocal thing. So, you know, if I'm seeing you, then you can see me as well. And then maybe things can be a little better. People don't have their walls up. So just wanted to hear your ideas about healing the relationship in that way.
Yeah, and so I'm happy to talk about it. Can you connect it a bit to the political thing that we're talking about here?
Yeah, because I'm talking about if you disagree with someone about the candidate that you're voting for.
Right.
That's the whole point. Is it, you know, isn't it helpful to make connections like you were talking about, Bill, about seeing what you have in common? Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a beautiful point and it relates to the conversation with Abby. We have a choice about where we focus, right? And we can focus on the political difference and then let that bleed into everything else, or we can say, oh, that's there, and then let me focus over here. It's choices we make, and it's not a given, you know. It's not a given that because you and I differ politically that has to be the big thing. That's not a given. That's a choice we make. And thinking about our broader relationship, thinking about positive qualities is an antidote to the hyper focus. One of the things I sometimes say when I give interviews about this is that we can decide not to let politicians hurt our relationships, because we make choices. We can so give ourselves over to the political thing that we allow that to bleed into our relationships, and we do not have to. We do not have to. It's a choice. So thank you.
Next question is from Hannah, and then it will be followed by Kathy Shapiro.
Hi, I'm
Hi
Hannah.
there.
I was so interested in this topic and to hear, dealing with family and loved ones who have differing views and how to converse. And I actually live in quite a bubble where I work, my family, we all pretty much actually are 100% agree politically. Are the skills that you've talked about today used with family any different from what you would use with somebody you're not in relationship with? Could you take these same skills, or are there skills that should be added if you're out campaigning, say, with people you're not in relationship with? You don't have the core thing of saying, we know we value this.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, the skills are transferable. They're harder for family because we have these, more intense ties, and disagreement can seem more threatening. But they're definitely usable. In fact, one of our newest workshops is for elected officials. It's called Managing Difficult Conversations with Constituents. And these are very similar skills to make a connection and to use I statements instead of truth statements. And even when one of my favorites that that I think we pretty uniquely teach in Brave Angels is when you're dealing with somebody who's on a roll, that pivot skill and saying, I have some thoughts about this, asking your way in, right? So yes, they're definitely that. In fact, a lot of times it's easier to practice them with other folks and then transfer them back to family, because with other people, you don't have the you've been saying this since you've been treating me this way since we were 12. And so, yes, definitely transferable skills. Yep. And they're about respect. So thank you.
Next is Kathy Shapiro, followed by Larry Wydrow.
Hi there.
Hi, thank you for this. This is great. And it's very transferable, not only beyond politics. I love this. So my question is, and in my case, it would be me being blue and more other blues hearing their comments to me. I'm not friending, they're no longer my friend. They must not be intelligent because they're without really listening. And I do my part to say, well, it's not, or they're not moral or whatever, and just some added maybe suggestions of what I could say without coming across like I'm on my high horse and being a good.
I'm a braver angel, and clearly you're not. Yeah, and actually, I'm happy to respond, and I also tie it into the loved ones, because one of the challenges that I faced with my Braver Angels identity is that I have lower tolerance for bashing people and stereotyping people, even if I don't agree with them. And so when I'm around loved ones where people do that, it's challenging to speak up without being a goody two shoes or telling them they're wrong, right? And so we have a whole great workshop on this called Depolarizing Ourselves. And so but one of the key things is to, again, using skills of something to agree with, and then an I statement about what I have learned about the other side. So the agreement might be, yeah, I think those ideas or what they're proposing, I completely disagree with it. You know, I agree with you that that's really going to take us in a bad path. That's the connection. And then in terms of some of the folks we're talking about, people we're talking about, what I just have been around more varied people than I had before. I've been reading, something. What's referenced it to something I've learned from interactions or from reading, or I read this very interesting columnist the other day. And here's what I have been learning. Okay. That not everybody's the same. There are multiple reasons why people vote the way they do, blah, blah, blah. So the key is finding something to agree with so people don't think you're going off the deep end on the other side. And then I statements is so, because a lot of people know I'm, big into Braver Angels. What I've taken to do, and so Gabby, maybe, you're getting this way too. And once you're bedded in this, I'll say, so I'm going to put on my Braver Angels hat right now. And with that hat on, here's what I can say. Now, when my Brave Angels hat's not on, but now I'm going to put it on. So some way to signal that there's something you've learned or something to make an observation, as opposed to flat out contradicting them. So give me some feedback on that, Kathy. How does that sound?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking for feedback. I've taken the depolarizing within workshop, both online and in person. And so I thought of it. I almost said, I know this is covered.
Right.
And and they're good reminders because obviously, I take a workshop and then I go out in my life. I was thinking about what I do and then what I could do better. I love the preface of I've learned that as opposed to this is the way it is. And that I need to say that more. One of the connections I use is that I live in a neighborhood. I'm blue, and I live in a neighborhood in South Orange County that is probably, we don't really do a lot of talking about politics, which is what I love, but is probably more red. And we get along, and it's a great neighborhood, and we just life together. And so I use that example, and I say, people are moral people, and people have reasons. I've kind of from some people that I've talked to, I've learned that it could be that they don't love Trump's character, but they think that his policies are better than Harris's, or they're more worried about, and I've said things like that. So it's confirming what you said, and it also added some things.
Good, great, thank you. Okay.
Next up, we have Larry Wydrow and then Carol Elwood.
Hey, Larry.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Well, the one thing I'm really struggling with today is that we don't get to see Mary Beth Stebbins' hat today. So that is a limit.
Put that on the evaluation, Larry.
Put that on the and that's a real loss. Anyway, my question is about people. There's some basic rules of democracy, and if people are not willing, to observe those rules. So if you were running a softball or baseball team, and a hit would win the game, and somebody says, I'm not going to leave the batter's box until I get a hit, no matter how many strikes, you say, well, these are the rules. Or somebody's coping mechanisms was to fight with people. You go play hockey. They fight in hockey, but not here. But and Levitsky and Zablat, the two basic rules are you accept the outcome of elections and you reject political violence. And if people don't observe those, you separate them. You don't say, well,
So you're going to get to a question, or
if people are not willing to accept those basic rules of democracy, that we don't despite the lack of evidence, we don't accept the 2020.
So pose a question from that.
Well,
I think
how would you handle
premise.
that? How would what
Yeah. Well, that's really important because you're talking about something that really comes up a lot, particularly from blues. You know, how do I engage in a conversation, let's say with a loved one or somebody else, when the two things I hear most from blues are when they're not in possession of the facts, and the second one, they don't seem to want to abide by the rules of a democracy, right? What I'm saying from a Braver Angels perspective is that we have to go in the conversations without preconditions that somebody has to agree to this, and this before we have a conversation. So we've finished this trustworthy elections process, for example, which is about norms and rules for democracy, as you're saying, with our Common Ground workshop, where people don't have to agree to something other than follow the ground rules of the workshop. There have to be some ground rules. And then in a process of people listening to each other's concerns, expressing their own, they were able to come up with points of agreement. And so what I'm saying is that I believe it's important to engage in the conversation, and in this case, try to learn why somebody is supporting ideas that seem inconsistent with democracy without them being stupid or a bad person, and try to deal, and then to share my concerns, again, with iMessages, and see if we can have a relationship with each other without either having to agree on facts or having to agree on whether the ground rules for democracy that one person holds them or not. So that's my answer. That staying in the conversation, and if somebody has what I think is an anti-democratic view, to try my best to learn about that, where that came from with them, and to share as an equal human being, to share my view about this and my worries that if we don't, let's say, accept elections, right, that we don't have a democracy, to say it as person to person, and then to see what you say back.
Okay, thank you. What I would say back is, let us have a look at that hat today. I just
well, I gave you my best. I gave you my best one. And what I can tell you, Larry, as that we could have a Red on next, who could say with equal passion that how do you talk to blues who reject limited government, who reject the First Amendment right to dissent. And then you might say, where the heck did that come from? So what I'm saying is that the Relation in Terms of Braver Angels, it's having the conversation without the preconditions that somebody has to accept. And you and I may differ on that, but I just wanted to reiterate. But I'm glad you brought it up, because it's something that happens, that comes up a lot, that I think it gave me the chance to say, in a way I haven't said before, that that the conversation has to be in there without the prejudgment that somebody's positions are unalterably wrong. So anyway, thank you for raising it. I'll ponder your question more too.
Okay, thank you, and we do disagree. Thank you.
That's good. Okay.
I think we have time for maybe one more question from Carol Elwood.
Yeah, thanks for all this. I'm wondering if there's any tips for reopening a relationship that appears closed due to differences. I'm thinking of an adult siblings, or a friendship where we've done our best to suggest that it's possible to disagree and still be friends, and the other person's just shut us out. Is that is it possible, I guess, to use these skills to rekindle something that appears to be dead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's yeah. If there's one skill, it's not really a skill, it's an attitude. And now I'm speaking more as a family therapist, okay? Is the humility one, is to say, I regret that we've had this distance, and I know I've contributed to it, and I hope we can find a way back, and without necessarily agreeing on politics. But the humility part would be I know that I have contributed to this, and I have regrets. I have regrets about how I have handled my part in this, and see if the other person would reciprocate that. This is sometimes how loved ones reconcile without having to agree on why they broke up, is that I'm sorry, I am sorry too, and move on. And then I would try to avoid politics after that with that person. So it's hard, and that's my best thought at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions. Those are really, really interesting and helpful for me to hear you reflect on, Bill, and just to get into. So yeah, I just want to say big thank you again, Bill, for this. This was really, really, really insightful. I believe we're going to be turning on the chat for folks. If you'd like to share, we invite you to share something that you're taking away with you from today. So we'd love to hear from you on that. I also, we have some really exciting upcoming events coming up. So I believe we'll be sharing a link to one of those. One particularly exciting one is Helping Loved Ones Divide by Politics with, again, our very own Dr. Bill Doherty. That will be on October 19th. You can refer to the chat if you'd like to sign up for that. Bill will be consulting with a family dyad who are struggling in their disagreements about politics. So again, very relevant to our conversation today. So definitely join us for that conversation. That's going to be extremely helpful. But yeah, just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you all being in this work with us. Bill, is there anything you'd like to add to?
No, thank you, Gabby, for facilitating this, and for folks listening in. There's always a group of people across the top of the screen, and when they look like they're listening, that's always good. And I saw a few people even taking a note or two, so that was sort of inspiring as we went. But I appreciated you doing this with me. Appreciate all the great questions. And I loved having one, Larry, where you and I disagree. That's part of the Brave Angels way. So that's cool. That's important. So yeah, happy to have done this.
Awesome. Yeah, and please feel free to share anything that you're taking away with you in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you, everyone. That's amazing. Annette is saying she's feeling so much calmer about the election. That's really wonderful to hear.
Yeah, recommending Monica Guzman's podcast, A Braver Way. It's a good salve for the soul. It comes out every week too. It's wonderful. Somebody said, Jim said, better prepared for supper with his son tonight. Yay, it's always good when it's timely. Always good when it's timely.
I love that. I love that. You can put your Brave Angels hat on before dinner.
All right. Well, it's 12:30 now, so we're going to shut down the Zoom. And there was one last question about signing up for the Braver Angels newsletter. And if you go to our braverangels.org website and scroll on the main page, there should be a place there where you can sign up. And certainly if you become a member, you will receive the newsletter as well. So enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.
Bye, everybody.